Okay, this is a video. The title is The End Time. What does it mean? I can't get my camera to work facing me, so I'm using the camera that faces the other side, and I'll just have to make do with that. At least you have you can have my voice if you don't get my face. Okay, the end time does not refer to the end of the world. Rather, it refers to a particular period of time during which Israel is captive. In other words, Israel is under the control of different nations. Okay, the prophet Daniel received a vision from God concerning the future of Israel. Daniel saw 4 beasts that stand for 4 empires that would successively rule over Israel in succession. Now, the first beast is Babylon. It ruled over Israel in Daniel's own time. The second beast is Persia, that ruled over Babylon. That conquered Babylon and ruled over Israel, again in Daniel's own time. And then Daniel foresaw the Greek Empire conquering Persia and inherit Israel as part of the Persian Empire. Finally, the Roman Empire conquered the Greek Empire, and so Rome is the 4th beast. Now, what does this have to do with the end time? Well, after the 4 beasts rule over Israel, in Daniel 7, it says that the people of the saints of the Most High would gain power and take over the kingdoms of the world. And so the Jews were looking forward to that time. And since Rome was the end, was the last of the 4 foreign countries that would rule Israel, the Jews they called the Roman period the end period, the end time, for that period in which Israel was under the control of foreign nations. And so the end time refers to the time when Israel did not have sovereignty. And hold on. Okay, the end time is mainly the time in which Israel was not a sovereign nation. Now, Israel has become a sovereign nation, but it is still the end time right now. And in the near future, the world will, the end time will be finished. We will enter the period that comes after the 4 beasts. But right now, I want to go into the 4 beasts, the last of the 4 beasts, number 4, the Roman Empire, and explain to you that Daniel 7, verse 7 and 8 are not as simple as they appear. Okay, the book of Revelation explains Daniel 7 and the 4th beast. The Jews, being the Jews, naturally they misinterpreted the period of the four beasts, especially the period of the last beast, the Roman Empire. Now, half the book of Revelation is devoted to explaining Daniel 7, verse 8 and verse 7 and verse 8. Superficially, Daniel 7, verse 7 and 8 looks like it's about one period of time, the period of the fourth beast. But the book of Revelation explains there are actually three separate periods within the confines of verses 7 and 8. Verse 7 equals the ancient Roman Empire under one-man rule, namely each successive Caesar. And then verse 8 equals another period in which the Roman Empire has fallen. It has split up into 10 sovereign nations, each with its own king. Actually more than 10, but it focuses on a subset of 10 nations. Finally, at the end of verse 8, one nation outside of the 10 nations invades and conquers all 10 nations. Now this is this conquest of the 10 nations equals the return of the Roman Empire, because instead of 10 kings ruling now, the situation reverts back to one-man rule. For the conquering king replaces the 10 kings with his own rulership. I want to emphasize that it's not the book of Revelation adding this to Daniel 7. Rather, it is Daniel 7, verse 8 itself, which contains this information. Namely, that the time of the 10 kings is post-Roman Empire. For at no time during the Roman Empire were there 10 Caesars ruling together concurrently. It never happened. So the fact that verse 8 mentions 10 kings ruling together, that automatically means the empire has fallen. And these 10 kings are not Caesars, they're simply national kings, kings of nations. The time of the 10 kings automatically must equal a time in which the Roman Empire is past tense. Next, the, quote, coming up among them, unquote, by the conquering king must mean invasion and conquest by a nation outside of the geography of the 10 nations ruled by the 10 kings. So the end time is finished only after Russia conquers Western Europe. Why do I say Russia is the conqueror of the 10 nations? Because there's no other nation that can possibly conquer all 10 leading nations of Western Europe at the same time. To sum up, the Roman Empire is supposed to be, the time of the Roman Empire was supposed to be the end time, the end of the waiting period that was supposed to be followed by Israel and the people of God coming to power over the world, which doesn't really mean Israel takes over the world. Rather, it means the world converts to Judaism in the form of Christianity, and that's how Israel and the church come out on top. Now, the Roman Empire comes two times, and there is a period in between the two phases of the Roman Empire. The end time is much longer than you would ordinarily think. The idea is the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire, exists in verse 7. And then at the beginning of verse 8, it is no longer in existence. And then at the end of verse 8, it comes back into existence. The idea is that one-man rule is in verse 7, 10 men ruling is in verse 8, and then at the end of verse 8, one-man rule returns. Now this agrees with and fulfills Revelation 17, verse 8 through 11, which says the beast, or the fourth beast, was, and then is not, and then will come again. I'll write a transcript in the description box under this video so that you can make a paper copy if you want to retain this information. I should throw in the fact that the conquest of Western Europe by Russia is not happening in a vacuum. Rather, Russia bombs America first, and it is by bombing America that Russia spooks the nations of Western Europe, and the Kremlin calls up Macron in Paris and tells him, if you tell your soldiers to lay down their arms, their weapons, we will not bomb Paris. But if you don't tell your soldiers to stop fighting, we will bomb Paris like we bombed the cities of America. And the Kremlin will call other countries, and call Britain, and call Germany, and call Italy, and call Austria, and call Switzerland, and so on. And so the nations of Europe will surrender because Russia bombs America. That's part of how Russia takes over Europe. I'm expecting this to happen possibly at the time of Pentecost, which is the end of May. Now, whenever it does happen, the Russians will rule the world for only 5 months. Revelation 9, verse 5 and 10. And so their time would be up at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles in October, if the time begins at Pentecost. Look up my old video about Pentecost as the time of the rapture and the time of the start of the trib. And I think I made that in 2018. I'm sorry I'm not more accurate on that, more certain. One last point. Forget about Daniel 9:27. It's not about the Antichrist. It's not about the end time. That passage has nothing to do with nuclear war. So when nuclear war does come, I want you to throw out any reliance on Daniel 9:27 and the 7-year trib. It's not going to be 7 years. Christ said, I come quickly. That means that once the trib begins, he will come quickly from that point. Now, if he comes just 5 months later, that would be quick, wouldn't it? But if he comes 7 years later, that would not be quick.